The snow fell in apologetic little flurries, too sparse to be a proper Christmas blanket, just enough to dust the world in a fine, white powder. It clung to the bare branches of the old oak in Arthur Vance's front yard, a tree whose age was a silent argument with the newer, more ambitious maples planted by the younger families on the block. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the distant chime of church bells and the even more distant scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. Arthur stood beside a simple wooden bird feeder, a thing of his own making. His hands, gnarled by time and labor the world had long forgotten, moved with a slow, deliberate grace. Each motion was an economy of effort, a testament to a life where wasted movement could have consequences measured in blood and breath. He wore a flannel jacket, its red plaid faded to the color of a dull sunset, and a worn wool cap pulled low over his brow. He did not feel the cold, or rather, he acknowledged it as a fact, like gravity or the turning of the earth, but did not permit it entry. It was a presence to be noted, not an enemy to be fought. He was 82 years old, a fact recorded on paper in a government file cabinet somewhere, but a number that felt abstract, belonging to someone else. Inside, he was simply present. The chickadees and sparrows knew his routine. They flitted in the branches of the oak, a nervous, twittering audience waiting for the performance to conclude. He was pouring sunflower seeds from a small canvas bag into the feeder's tray. His hands, though webbed with the fine lines of age and marked by a slight, persistent tremor, were impossibly steady at the point of action. The seeds flowed in a silent, controlled stream, not a single one spilling onto the snow-dusted ground below. It was this stillness, this perfect calm, that was the first thing to irritate Chad Brogan. Brogan arrived in a Ford F-150, so clean it seemed to repel the falling snow. It was white, emblazoned on the side with the official crest of the town of Oak Creek and the words, Code Enforcement. The truck made a sound of authority, its tires crunching on the salted asphalt with a self-important grit. Chad Brogan stepped out of the truck, leaving the engine running. He was 29, with a gym-sculpted physique that his tight-fitting official polo shirt was designed to advertise. He had a haircut that cost more than the old man's entire outfit, and a jaw that he clenched as a matter of habit, as if constantly chewing on some minor injustice. In his hand, he held a clipboard, the modern scepter of the petty tyrant. He saw the old man, a stooped figure in faded colors, and his lip curled in a practiced sneer. This was the house, the one from the anonymous complaint. Probably Henderson from 3 doors down, who complained about everything. But a complaint was a complaint, and it gave Chad a reason to be out here on Christmas morning, earning holiday pay, and asserting the natural order of things. "Morning," Chad said. The word was not a greeting. It was an opening salvo. Arthur did not turn. He finished pouring the seeds, his movements unhurried. He tapped the side of the feeder gently, a silent invitation to the birds. Only then did he turn his head, his pale blue eyes settling on the young man. They were eyes like a deep, cold well, and for a half-second, Chad felt an unnerving sense of being weighed and measured. He dismissed it instantly. "You Arthur Vance?" Chad demanded, his voice a little too loud in the morning's quiet. Arthur gave a slow, single nod. "I'm Chad Brogan, Oak Creek Code Enforcement," he announced, puffing his chest slightly. "Got a complaint about this property. Multiple infractions, actually." He made a show of looking at his clipboard, though he had memorized the short list. It was his stage, and this old man was his audience. "Let's see," he mused, tapping a pen against the board. "Failure to maintain exterior paint." He gestured vaguely with the clipboard toward the fence, where a few chips of white paint were indeed peeling, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. Arthur's gaze followed the gesture, then returned to Brogan's face. He said nothing. His silence was a void, and Chad felt an immediate need to fill it with more of his own noise. "Unyarded debris," he continued, pointing now at a small, neat stack of firewood beside the back porch. "That needs to be on a raised platform, mister. It's a haven for rodents." From her kitchen window next door, Sarah Jenkins watched the scene unfold. She held a warm mug of coffee, its steam fogging the cold glass. She knew Arthur. Not well, but as a quiet, constant presence in the neighborhood. He was the one who shoveled her walk before she was even awake after a heavy snow. He was the one who had, with his impossibly steady hands, fixed her son's bicycle chain when it slipped, speaking no more than a dozen words the entire time. She saw the clean, white truck and the puffed-up young man with the clipboard, and a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. It was Christmas morning. And this, Brogan said, his voice dripping with theatrical disdain as he walked over to the bird feeder. This is an unpermitted structure. He rapped his knuckles on the feeder's cedar roof. The birds in the oak tree scattered in a flurry of panicked wings. Arthur's eyes flickered toward the tree, a brief, almost imperceptible expression of regret crossing his face. Then his gaze returned to Brogan. Still, he did not speak. This was the true offense. The silence. Chad Brogan's authority was fueled by reaction. He needed fear, or anger, or sputtering excuses. He needed engagement. This old man's placid indifference was like trying to punch water. It was infuriating. It felt like disrespect. "Are you deaf, old man?" Chad snapped, his professional demeanor cracking. "I'm citing you for 3 violations. These come with fines. They escalate. You understand what fines are, don't you? Money." He drew the word out, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. Arthur's gaze did not waver. "Understand," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like stones shifting at the bottom of a river. It was deeper and steadier than Chad had expected, and it carried an odd weight. The simple confirmation, devoid of any emotional freight, only stoked Brogan's frustration. He felt the eyes of the neighborhood on him. He could see the curtains twitching in the windows up and down the street. He was losing control of the narrative. He needed to reestablish his dominance. "I'm going to need to see some identification," he demanded. "Prove you're the property owner." This was a line he knew he was crossing. He had already run the plates and confirmed the address. This was pure harassment, a power play. Arthur did not move to get his wallet. He simply stood there, a statue carved from patience. "My name is Arthur Vance," he stated, as if that should be enough. "That's not what I asked." Brogan shot back, stepping closer, invading the old man's personal space. "I asked for ID. State issued." Now, in her kitchen, Sarah felt her grip tighten on her mug. This was wrong. Deeply wrong. Her father had been a Marine colonel. He had taught her to recognize 2 things above all others: the brittle swagger of a bully and the quiet stillness of a man who had seen the world's worst and was no longer impressed by its noise. She was seeing both, standing 10 yards apart on a snow-dusted lawn. Brogan noticed the faded bumper sticker on the old, rust-pocked pickup truck parked in the driveway. It was a simple sticker, a silhouette of a soldier kneeling before a cross. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Oh, you're one of those. A vet." He looked Arthur up and down, taking in the stooped shoulders, the worn clothes. "Let me guess. Supply sergeant? Cook? What was your call sign, Pops?" The word hung in the cold air. Call sign. For the first time, something shifted in Arthur's composure. It wasn't a flinch. It was a change in density. The air around him seemed to grow heavier, colder. His eyes, which had been placidly observing, now focused. The world outside fell away. The snow, the houses, the arrogant young man in front of him, it all dissolved. He is no longer in Oak Creek. He is at 30,000 feet, the air thin and screaming past the open ramp of AC 130. The cold is a physical beast, clawing at any exposed inch of skin. The weight of the gear is immense, a second skeleton of metal and nylon. The night is absolute, a blackness so complete it feels solid. Below, a broken landscape of jagged peaks and shadowed valleys, an enemy's heartland. A voice, crackling with static, fills his ear. It is the only anchor in the roaring chaos. "Spectre, this is Night Owl. We have a confirmed visual on the target zone. Weather is holding. You are green on my mark. Mark. His hand, young and strong, grips the static line. He does not hesitate. He steps out into the abyss. The memory lasted less than a second, but it was a lifetime. When his focus returned to his front yard, the look in his eyes had changed. The deep, cold well was still there, but now something ancient and dangerous swam in its depths. Sarah saw it from her window. It was a flicker, a momentary hardening of the old man's face that transformed him from a frail neighbor into something else entirely. Something formidable. Her father's words came back to her. There are men who fought in wars you've never read about. They don't talk. They don't wear the hats or the jackets. They just are. If you ever see one being disrespected by a loudmouth fool, you make a call. You have a duty. He had made her memorize a number. A strange number, not for an emergency service, but for a department she didn't fully understand. The Department of Defense Protocol and Honors Directorate. She had thought he was being overly dramatic. Now, she wasn't so sure. The look in Arthur's eyes was a catalyst. She put her mug down, her hands moving with sudden purpose. She grabbed her phone. Chad Brogan, blind to the subtle shift he had caused, saw only the old man's continued silence. He saw it as a victory. He had finally gotten to him. He decided to press his advantage, to deliver the final, humiliating blow. "Look at you," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Can't even answer a simple question. Pathetic." He reached out and, in a gesture of ultimate contempt, snatched the small canvas bag of birdseed from Arthur's hand. "And we're confiscating this. Inspected feed. Could be contaminated. Could attract vermin." He turned and tossed the bag into the wet snow beside the curb. The seed spilled out, a dark stain against the white. "That's another fine," Brogan said, a triumphant smirk on his face. "We're probably up to $500 now. Maybe more. You gonna find your wallet now, old-timer?" Arthur looked at the spilled seeds. He looked at the arrogant young man. And then he looked up at the sky. It started as a sound that didn't belong. A low, rhythmic whomp 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 that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was a sound out of place with the gentle Christmas chimes and the quiet suburban morning. Brogan heard it too. He frowned, annoyed at the interruption. "What is that? A news helicopter?" But the sound grew. It grew from a background noise to a chest-thumping, window-rattling roar. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a news chopper. This was a deeper, more menacing sound. A sound of pure, unadulterated power. A shadow fell over the street, vast and swift. Heads popped out of doors up and down the block. The curtain twitchers were now blatant gawkers on their front porches. Chad Brogan looked up, his jaw slackening. Descending from the gray sky, with an impossible, terrifying grace, was a helicopter. It was not a civilian craft. It was matte black, angular, and bristling with antennas and sensors that spoke of a purpose far beyond traffic reports. A UH-60 Blackhawk. Its rotor wash was a hurricane. It blasted the powdery snow off the lawns in every direction. Christmas wreaths were torn from doors. Inflatable Santas buckled and collapsed. Chad's precious clipboard was ripped from his grasp and sent cartwheeling down the street. His perfectly coiffed hair was whipped into a frenzy. The helicopter did not circle. It descended with unnerving precision, its landing gear reaching down toward the one place on the street large enough to hold it, Arthur Vance's spacious, snow-covered front lawn. It touched down with a final, ground-shaking thud, its massive blades beginning to slow. The entire world seemed to fall silent, the sudden absence of the roaring blades replaced by the high-pitched whine of the decelerating turbines. No one moved. Every resident of Oak Creek's Elm Street was frozen, staring at the military gunship now occupying the front yard of the quiet old man at number 217. Chad Brogan stood as if turned to stone, his mind utterly failing to process what was happening. His world of fines and ordinances and petty power had just been invaded by a reality he didn't know existed. The side door of the Black Hawk slid open with a smooth, hydraulic hiss. Two soldiers in army dress blues, rifles held in a ceremonial, but no less intimidating posture, stepped out. They moved with a fluid, synchronized precision, taking up positions on either side of the door. Then, a third figure emerged. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and ramrod straight. His uniform was crisp, adorned with more ribbons and medals than Chad could count. On each shoulder, 4 silver stars glittered against the dark green fabric. A 4-star general. The general's eyes scanned the scene, his face a mask of cold fury. He ignored the gaping neighbors. He walked past Chad Brogan as if he were a piece of lawn furniture, his polished boots making no sound on the snow. He walked directly to Arthur Vance. He stopped exactly 3 feet away. In the ringing silence of the suburban street, the general's arm snapped up in the sharpest, most profound salute Chad had ever witnessed. It was a gesture of such immense, palpable respect that it seemed to physically alter the space around them. Colonel Vance, the general's voice boomed, a voice accustomed to commanding armies, yet now filled with an unmistakable reverence. "It is an honor, sir." Arthur looked at the general. He gave a slow, tired nod of acknowledgement. "Marcus," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "You're making a scene." The general, Marcus Thorne, held his salute. He did not smile. His gaze, hard as diamond, shifted from Arthur and fell upon the trembling form of Chad Brogan. "A scene is precisely what is required," General Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all its warmth and becoming something as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. He finally lowered his hand, but his posture of respect toward Arthur remained absolute. He took a step forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Arthur, a human shield of 4-star authority. He addressed not just Brogan, but the entire street, his voice ringing out with command authority. "For those of you who are confused," he began, "allow me to provide some clarity." His eyes locked onto Brogan's. "This man," he said, gesturing with a gloved hand toward Arthur, "who this official," he spat the word like a foul taste, "is harassing on Christmas morning over peeling paint and a bird feeder, is retired United States Air Force Colonel Arthur Vance." He paused, letting the ranks sink in. That alone should be enough, but it is not the full story. General Thorne took a slow, deliberate step toward Brogan, who involuntarily flinched and took a step back. To the United States government, he is a decorated officer. To the men who had the distinct honor of serving under his command, he was a legend. And to the enemies of this nation who had the profound misfortune of crossing his path, he was known by another name. The general's voice grew quiet, yet somehow more intense, more penetrating. They called him Spectre. A gasp went through the small crowd of neighbors. Sarah, watching from her porch, felt tears well in her eyes. It was true. The legend was real, and he was her neighbor. "You asked for his call sign, son," Thorne said, his voice a lethal whisper. "His call sign is Spectre, and you are not worthy to speak it." Brogan was chalk white, his body shaking uncontrollably. His world of regulations and citations had crumbled into dust. 30 years ago, General Thorne continued, his voice rising again to project across the lawns, an F-117 Nighthawk was shot down over hostile territory. The pilot was alive, but injured with enemy patrols closing on his position. A rescue mission was deemed impossible. Too risky. A guaranteed failure. He turned his head to look at Arthur with an expression of profound debt. But one man disagreed. He volunteered for a solo high-altitude, low-opening jump into the heart of their territory. For 72 hours, he evaded patrols, treated the pilot's injuries, and carried him on his back through 20 miles of brutal mountain terrain to a clandestine extraction point. Thorne's gaze swept back over the crowd. "That pilot was my father. The man who saved him was Spectre." The silence on the street was now a living thing, a thick blanket of awe and shame. "This man," Thorne said, his voice now trembling with a controlled rage as he pointed a finger directly at Brogan's chest, "holds 2 medals of honor. One of them is so heavily classified that the citation on the wall at the Pentagon is just a frame with his name on it. He holds 3 Air Force crosses, 5 silver stars. He has served on every continent on this planet, in conflicts that were never reported on the news. He has sacrificed more for his country than you can possibly comprehend. Thorn took another step, closing the distance until he was towering over the cowering code enforcement officer. And you are Chad Brogan. Your authority comes from a laminated card and a town ordinance. You think that gives you the right to disrespect him? To threaten him? To spill his birdseed in the snow? The general's voice dropped to a growl. You have just harassed a national treasure. You have mistaken stillness for weakness. You have mistaken silence for fear. You have made a catastrophic error in judgment, and you have done it in front of me. Brogan tried to speak. A pathetic, squeaking sound came from his throat. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care. Thorn roared, the sound echoing off the houses. You looked at this man, and you saw only what your arrogant, shallow mind could process, an old man. You failed to see the giant standing in front of you. That failure will now define the rest of your very short career. General Thorn pulled a satellite phone from his coat. He pressed a single button. This is General Thorn, he said into the phone, his voice calm and deadly. Give me the mayor of Oak Creek on this line. I don't care if he's in church. Get him. And while you're at it, give me a direct line to the state's attorney general. Inform him that I will be filing a federal complaint against an employee of this town for the harassment of a protected military veteran. He listened for a moment. Yes, immediately. He disconnected the call and looked down at Brogan, whose face had crumpled into a mask of pure terror. Your job is gone. I will personally see to it that your conduct is reviewed by every relevant state and federal authority. You will likely face civil litigation. I suggest you find a very good lawyer. Now get out of my sight before I have you arrested for interfering with a matter of national security. The last phrase was a bluff, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Brogan stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. He scrambled up, not even bothering to look for his lost clipboard. He ran to his truck, his movements clumsy and panicked. He fumbled with the door, yanked it open, and threw himself inside. The engine of the F-150 roared to life, and he peeled out, tires squealing on the wet pavement, a final, pathetic squeal of noise in a place that now demanded silence. The white truck disappeared around the corner. The street was quiet again, save for the low whine of the Blackhawks turbines. General Thorn's entire demeanor shifted. The cold fury vanished, replaced by a warm, almost familial concern. He turned back to Arthur. I apologize for the intrusion, Colonel. The call came from a neighbor. She seemed persuasive. Arthur finally spoke, his voice the calm center of the storm he had created by simply existing. He's just a boy, Marcus, full of noise and vinegar. The world makes too many of them these days. There was no anger in his voice, only a weary observation, a diagnosis of a common ailment. He is a fool who disrespected a king, Arthur, Thorn said softly. That cannot be allowed to stand. Protocol must be observed. He gestured toward the waiting helicopter. The mess at Peterson Air Force Base is serving a proper Christmas dinner. I'm told there's prime rib. My helicopter is warm. Will you do me the honor of joining me, sir? Arthur Vance looked at his small, quiet house. He looked at the bird feeder, now surrounded by the tracks of the general's boots. He looked at the spilled seeds in the snow. Then he looked at the 4-star general who had flown here personally to defend his honor. A small, tired smile touched the corners of his lips. He gave a single, slow nod. I suppose I could eat, he said. Without another word, Arthur began walking toward the helicopter. The crowd of neighbors, who had been watching in stunned silence, parted for him as if the sea itself were making way. They stared at him with new eyes, seeing not the quiet old man, but the specter who walked among them. General Thorn fell in a step just behind him, and to his left, a position of deference and protection. The 2 soldiers by the helicopter snapped to attention as they approached. Arthur climbed the steps into the belly of the machine, moving with the same slow, deliberate economy of motion with which he filled his bird feeder. The general followed him in. The door slid shut. The whine of the turbines rose to a roar. The massive blades bit into the air, and the Black Hawk lifted off the lawn, its ascent as precise and controlled as its landing. It hovered for a moment, then tilted forward and surged into the gray sky, disappearing into the clouds. It left behind a silence that was louder than its roar had ever been. In the days that followed, the story became a local legend. Chad Brogan was fired before the end of Christmas Day, the mayor himself issuing a public and deeply fearful apology to Colonel Vance. An investigation was launched into the town's code enforcement department, uncovering years of petty abuses of power. The town council, in a special session, unanimously passed a new ordinance, informally known as the Vance Act, which explicitly protected elderly and veteran residents from frivolous or harassing code complaints. Sarah Jenkins received a personal, handwritten letter from General Thorne, thanking her for her vigilance and moral courage. She framed it and hung it on her wall. Weeks later, when the snow had melted and the first signs of spring were beginning to whisper in the air, Arthur Vance was back in his yard. He had built a new bird feeder, slightly larger than the last, but just as simple, just as perfect. He was filling it from the same canvas bag of seeds. As he worked, a small chickadee, bolder than the rest, fluttered down from the oak tree. It did not land on the feeder. It landed on Arthur's outstretched hand, its tiny feet a delicate weight on his worn skin. It picked a single seed from his palm and flew away. Arthur watched it go, his face calm, his eyes as deep and quiet as a winter sky. In a world that celebrated thunder, the quietest men were the ones who carried the lightning.